So hello, everyone. Welcome to La Suprema lunch. We're really excited to have everyone together for this hour. And for those of you that are new to La Suprema lunch, I think I see a handful of newcomers here. I wanted to just let you know who we are at La Suprema, what we do, and just give you a big welcome. So La Suprema Works and Events is a co-working space in Barrio Viejo. Um, we opened in May of 2020, so we're pretty new, but we love being in this community and we love serving Tucson. And the way that we do that is through private office memberships, through co-working memberships. So, like shared workspace, essentially. I'm hanging out in a private office right now, which I love. And if you or anyone you know is looking for a private suite, we do have some available. And we also have resident desks available too. It's a desk in a shared space where you really get to settle in. You can bring your monitor or photos of your family, anything like that. And all of those memberships have 24/7 access. So if you or anyone you know is interested, you can always reach out to me at alex@lasupremaworks.com. And for those of you that don't know, I'm Alex Biddle. I am the community manager at La Suprema. I realized I did not mention that earlier. And there's another event that I just wanted to give a little shout out to, Creative Mornings. They're hosting an event tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. It's the Promise of Localism with Thomas Barr of Local First Arizona. And you can find more information at creativemornings.com. So I just wanted to give a little shout out there. If you have some time to join that tomorrow. And then for today, we're super excited to have Thom with us. He's an attorney at law, and he's going into practicing his 49th year of law. He's in the best lawyers in America and is an Arizona super lawyer. He also wrote a book called How to Not Be a Stupid Manager, that you can find on Amazon. I'm going to pick up my copy sometime this week. And today he's going to be talking about Arizona's recreational marijuana law, employers' rights and responsibilities. And just so you all know, we do love questions here. So there might be some time throughout to ask questions. We can always stop if you have a question for Thom, and then we'll also save some time at the end for questions. So please feel free to put those in the chat, and I will ask them when the timing is right. So, alrighty. Well, without further ado, I'm gonna pull up the presentation, Thom, and we'll let you get started.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody being here to talk about. Well, probably ought to get to the beginning slide. There we go. Next slide would be good. Next after that. There we go. So I appreciate everybody being online so far. I see about 15 people. That probably includes me, so that we have 14 people. Includes Alex, so we have 13 people. But whatever it is, I'm happy to be here and help educate you on your rights as an employer, or maybe you're a recreational marijuana user and you want to know what your rights are. Feel free to ask that question as well. And as Alex said so rightly, it's very important that if you have a question at the time I say something, go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask me the question, or put it in the chat room. And if I can read it really quickly, I'll answer it right away, or Alex can monitor that and let me know what the question is, and we can go from there. So next slide, please. Will you send out a link to the materials? So Alex, that's on you. If you can send out a link to the registrants.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the materials basically amount to my PowerPoint slides, which, by the way, as an old guy in his 70s, I really don't do PowerPoint with, zooming in from different corners and having music and things like that. I just decided that sometimes straight up is better, especially when we're talking about marijuana. Otherwise, people are going to think I'm on marijuana if the slides are too active. The other thing is, if this was a live presentation, I would not have samples. Sometimes I bring brownies and to live presentations, and people think they're loaded with samples of marijuana, but they're not. But it's kind of a fun little fun thing that I do. Always bring brownies to a marijuana presentation. So just remember that. So the question is, has your workplace drug and alcohol policy gone to pot? And what we're going to talk about really are what can you do? What are your rights? What are your employees' rights? And I want to show you a picture, which I think is the next slide.
Yeah.
So this is a grow room. So I took a picture. This is my picture that I took. It's not something I pulled off the internet. I'm sure you can find one just like it on the internet, but I found this in Colorado. When Colorado first got legalized marijuana, someone I know there is growing marijuana in their basement. And this is their grow room. And this is an illegal grow room in Arizona because it has too many plants, like a lot of too many plants. So just in case you've never seen what marijuana looks like as it's growing, I thought I would educate you. So when you're out there hiking and riding your bike and you see a plant that looks like that, it could be wild growing marijuana in Arizona, which it does, by the way. So next slide, please. What I'm going to do is we're going to briefly review the medical marijuana law because I think it's important to distinguish between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. So recreational marijuana is going to be effective April 5th of 2021, which is, it's on the slide, so you'll know that. You don't have to take any notes. And there's a big difference between your rights under recreational marijuana and your rights under medical marijuana. And you don't want to mix the two up because it's totally different and you can get into trouble under Arizona law in a heartbeat if you run afoul of the medical marijuana laws. So as a recap, let's remember this: employees may not be fired just because of A1, they test positive for marijuana, or B, they have a medical marijuana card. All right, so those two things for sure. So you have an employee that's in an accident at work, they test positive for marijuana, and they pull out their medical marijuana card. And they say, I have a medical marijuana card. The fact that they tested positive and the fact that they have a card are not enough to terminate them at that point. What you have to find out is if they're inebriated, under the influence, whether or not the marijuana was the cause of their accident, whether or not they're incapacitated or in any way impaired. Those are the things you'll have to determine based on many things that are in the law, such as the smell of their clothes, can they put together a declarative sentence, how their eyes look, all kinds of different things that are in the law that tell you that you can objectively and subjectively determine someone is impaired. But here's the problem. When you're hiring people or somewhere in the course of your employment, people always want to know, do my employees have medical marijuana cards? And in and of itself, that's not an illegal question, but it is an illegal question under the Americans with Disabilities Act because 95% of all the conditions covered under medical marijuana cards are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you can never ask a person if they have a disability. Under the American Disability ADA, you can never ask them that question because that's illegal. And unless you frame the question as such as, we have a requirement that you must be able to see your monitor, or we have a requirement that you must be able to drive a vehicle, or we have a requirement that you must be able to use a keyboard. Can you do the essential functions of the job? You always want all of your inquiries in pre-hire screening to be related to the essential functions of the job. Always, always, always. So we don't care. You don't ask questions like, does your husband mind if you travel? If travel is a requirement. The question is better phrased and more legally phrased. The job requires travel, at least 2 weeks a month. Are you able to do that? Person says yes, the inquiry is over. Even though you may know from a third source that they have a newborn at home. Once they tell you that it's okay to go and that they are able to do the essential function, then that's the end of that story. So it's the same thing with the medical marijuana card. You cannot ask the question. And when you ask about essential functions under the ADA, if they say, yes, I can do it, then that's the end of the inquiry. The other question, of course, becomes is they say, well, I do 95% employer defense in my practice now, but I've had clients that are individuals. I had a client with Parkinson's that wanted to have what they call Dragon. It's a speak to print app on a computer, and the employer would not give it to him as an accommodation, even though he asked. And so that's a problem. If the applicant says I can do it if I have a Dragon, if I need an accommodation, and then you start talking about the reasonable accommodation issue. Let's go to the next slide, please. So if you have a card, again, we're still talking about medical marijuana. The employer may not divert any marijuana to anyone who doesn't have a card. They can only get 2.5 ounces every 2 weeks from a dispensary, and still illegal under federal law. Now, the feds clearly are not worried about people with medical marijuana cards. They are worried about distribution. They're worried about drug dealers. They're worried about people like that coming over. I want to say from across the border of Canada, bringing, people think all the drugs come in through Mexico. A lot of drugs and things like illegal substance come in through Canada as well. Remember, we have 2 borders in the United States, not just one. The feds are not worrying about it, at least in Arizona. They're not. I've never heard of anybody that's got a medical marijuana card being prosecuted for having marijuana in their possession. Speaking of federal law, let's see. I don't know who all's on the call and what you all are doing as employers, but I can tell you that if you have a federal contract such that you would lose it if you did not enforce federal law, then you are not subject to Arizona's medical marijuana law, because you would lose an economic benefit. The statute is very clear. If you would lose a federal economic benefit by not enforcing federal law, you will indeed not be covered by medical marijuana card, which means that if a person says you have to hire me because I have a card and you're a federal contractor, your answer is nope, I don't. And I don't have to hire you, and I don't have to tell you why, other than I'm a federal contractor and your medical marijuana card does not protect you from hiring or firing if you should find out a person has a card while they're employed and you didn't know it before. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's what the statute says. You may not discriminate against a person in hiring, termination, or imposing any term or condition of employment otherwise penalize a person based on its status as a cardholder or positive drug test. And when they say hiring and firing, that's exactly what they mean. Somebody comes to you, I have this come up all the time in my practice. My clients will call me up and they'll say, well, I interviewed this person. They say, I have a medical marijuana card, you have to hire me. Well, that's not true either. You just can't refuse to hire somebody because they have a card. If they're not the most qualified person for the job, you don't have to hire them just because they have a card. The other thing is, we're going to talk about safety sensitive positions. So in case you have a question about that, let me know. But a lot of jobs are what we would consider safety sensitive positions, such as driving for your company or taking deposits to the bank for, as part of their job duties, driving on maybe their own car, but on company business, and that's a regular part of their job. Working heavy machinery, working in food service, working in pharmacy, working as a doctor, or on a client's premises. Those are all considered safety sensitive positions. And a medical marijuana card will not protect you at all if you're the card holder from termination or non-hire if you're looking at a safety sensitive position. And to that end, I would suggest to you that if in fact you have safety sensitive positions, and I can send you a list of 100 safety sensitive positions if you want, just ask Alex and I'll send it to her and then she can distribute it so that we don't have 15 or 20 emails running around trying to figure out who wants what.
Perfect.
But there are so many different and food handlers. If you have a kitchen or a restaurant, anybody who's handling food is not protected by their card. There are a host of those. And so my suggestion to you is that you put that in a job description. or at the least, if you're not large enough employer to really go crazy, but meaningful job descriptions that are ADA compliant. And by that, I mean, you don't say job duties, you say essential functions, for instance. That's an ADA compliant job description, for instance. And there are a lot of things. My email should be on one of these slides somewhere at the end, I think. And all you have to do is say in your subject line, La Suprema lunch program, ask me a question and I'll be happy to answer your question for free. And just so you know, as long as it's reasonably related to the topic at hand and not some free legal advice on some handbook issue, but we can even go there. I'm an ecumenical kind of guy, it doesn't matter. So it's really important for me as your lawyer or your lawyer that you may have already, that your job description says job is safety sensitive. But let's assume for a moment, as I said, you're not large enough to really get nuts about detailed job descriptions. You have maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 employees. And you don't really feel job descriptions are necessary because a lot of people do different things and those job duties change. So in your recruiting, you want to put safety sensitive job in your job ad on Indeed, or used to be an ad in the newspaper, but nobody does that anymore. In fact, I don't think I may be the only person on the planet still reads the hard copy newspaper. But anybody, what we do is we put, if there's a safety sensitive position in our law firm, we will put that in the job ad with Indeed or whatever those are, online job boards. And I recommend that very highly so that people know. You don't have to say something like safety sensitive position, medical marijuana card holders need not apply. You don't have to get that, drill down, but I would suggest that if you have a safety sensitive position, put it in there. So we can go to the next slide, please. So a couple things. Employees that have a card are not able to possess or use marijuana at your work site. And your work site is very expansive. That includes cars, trucks, vehicles, client premises, your premises, anything that's related to their workspace. And when I say client premises, let's assume you are a tech company that does IT work for companies and you're a contractor for IT, and your IT techs go running around to all the different clients, even with or without with their car or your car. They're not protected by being able to have a joint or a gummy bear or something like that with medical marijuana in it. And by the way, gummy bears are the number one. In Colorado, when they first started up with medical marijuana, and the gummy bears were the number one way people ingested marijuana. And still edibles are the number one way people get marijuana now. Nobody's, furtively smoking a joint behind the kitchen door. So everybody's out there in the open having a brownie. So they can be fired if you find them using or even possessing, not necessarily using, but possessing. You may fire them for that. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so 60% of people in Arizona, which is a fairly large amount of people, voted in favor of recreational marijuana. It's called Prop 207. And I love the name of the law, Smart and Safe Arizona Act. I'm trying to figure out what's so smart and safe about a bunch of people running around high on drugs, driving their cars. That I find that hard. I find that hard to understand how that could be smart and safe. So remember now, if you've ever drunk or had alcohol, you know that 0.08 is considered drunk, legally drunk, or incapacitated or impaired. We don't have such a standard for marijuana. So we don't really know how many parts per million of THC it takes to make a person that, like myself, I'm only 5 feet 2 inches tall and weigh 120 pounds. If I have a joint of marijuana or ingest a half an ounce of marijuana, it may stay in my system for a month, 38 days or more. Take a person that's 250 pounds, 6 feet tall, or 6'2" or 3, that person might metabolize that THC within a week or 2 weeks, even though just after one hit of marijuana. So you can't really say that just because if I had a joint on January 1st, that if I test positive on January 28th, that I'm incapacitated, because there's really no way to know that. So unless I'm in a safety sensitive position, in which case all bets are off no matter what, recreational or medical, I'm not incapacitated. Now, when it comes down to, let's go, by the way, like I said, it's effective April 5th, 2021. Next slide, please. All right. So before I get into more detail, let me just say you can grow up to 6 marijuana plants in your house. So if you're into horticulture and you have a green thumb and you like gardening, you can grow up to 6 plants. Any more than that, that's illegal. As long as the plants are enclosed and locked in a locked area and out of sight. So they need to be, so when I come to your house to visit after COVID's done, and you want to show me around your house, and because it's such a nice mansion, you want to show me your grow room, it better be enclosed all by itself with no windows, no nothing, with a locked door, or you will have an illegal grow room. Just so you know. So when medical marijuana first came out, people were saying, people are investing in the marijuana industry and making a killing. And my thought was, look, if you really want to make money in the medical marijuana, now the recreational marijuana area, invest in hydroponics. Those are the things that make marijuana grow. You don't even have to grow marijuana. You just start selling lights, grow lights and irrigation tubes and things like that. I know that my friend in Colorado spent almost $500 per light in his grow room. So a lot of people out there making money off the medical marijuana or the marijuana industry that have nothing to do with actually growing marijuana. The interesting thing about the marijuana law, Prop 207, is that it subjects marijuana sales to a 16% sales tax. And one of the selling points of the law, excuse me, was that the revenues would be divided among community college districts, police, sheriff, and fire. And if you hear a phone ringing in the background, that's my phone somewhere in the kitchen, and I can't get to it, nor will I. It'll go away in a minute. Sorry.
No worries. It'll be gone soon.
I don't have anybody here to answer my phone, including myself. So what I find interesting about that is there's nothing in the law that tells you how much anybody's going to get, right? So let's assume it's $10 million, pick a number. How do we know how much the community college is going to get, the police, the sheriff, and the fire, among other smaller entities? How do we know how that's going to be distributed? We don't know that. They don't have a plan for that. But just know that if you're buying recreational marijuana, which by the way now is going to be sold by the medical marijuana dispensaries, who by statute have the right of first refusal to start selling recreational marijuana. So I'm not quite sure how it all works with the tax, but I thought you'd be interesting to know that you don't just walk in and buy some grass or buy some cookies and brownies. You get taxed on it at a 16% rate. So next slide, please. I need to also be mindful of the time. I don't know where we are, but it looks like we're at 12:20 something.
It's 12:26.
Okay. So you'll give me a heads up. Let me know like 10 minutes before I start winding down. So one of the other cool things about the law is if you have a drug possession in Arizona related to crimes of cultivation of marijuana, possession, distribution, consumption, transportation, you may actually have your criminal record expunged, which is the legal word for wiped out. You actually can petition the court to say, I want my record of possession of marijuana of less than an ounce or more than an ounce, whatever it is, taken off my record, so that when the people do a background check on you, that criminal record goes away. And that applies to your employees as well, of course, not just people on this call. And so what the situation is going to be is that some of your people that you are background checking may already have their record expunged, but not until after April 5th. So if you're going to do background checks, and I don't think there's going to be a rush to the courthouse for expungement of records, because I think that that's kind of something in the law that's there, but I'm not sure everybody that smokes grass or imbibes marijuana knows that that's in the law. However, the one thing that's very important is to know is that there are no provisions for snacking while you're ingesting marijuana, and you're on your own for snacks. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the actual statute, and the statute is extremely clear for you, for employers. And it's a really well-written statute for employers, and it says, does not restrict the rights of employers to maintain a drug and alcohol-free workplace or affect the ability of employers to have a workplace policy restricting use of marijuana by employees or prospective employees. Basically, if you have a good, solid, well-written drug and alcohol policy prohibiting the use of marijuana or any other controlled substances in your handbook, that's going to be good. But here's the thing, because recreational marijuana is no longer a controlled substance in Arizona as of April 5th, you should change your policy to include marijuana as a separate drug that's prohibited in your workplace. So let's assume you have a policy, all possession and use of illegal substances or controlled substances, including the unauthorized use of prescription drugs, is prohibited at ABC Company. I would have you add, and the use of recreational marijuana, because that way you differentiate from a controlled illegal substance with marijuana, because your policy needs to say that we prohibit marijuana itself, because now it's legal to use it. Now and you want to make sure your policy also says you cannot be impaired in the workplace because of the illegal use of illegal drugs, including marijuana and including prescription drugs. So that you want to make sure that you carve out a separate drug policy, or within your drug policy, that you have the word marijuana in it. Because if it's no longer a controlled substance, it's no longer an illegal substance, then it wouldn't fit within your policy because it was an illegal substance, but now it's not. So I would suggest that you redo your policy as soon as sometime before now on April 5th of 2021. Next slide, please. All right, now the other thing it does not allow or gives you rights is you're not required to allow or accommodate the use, consumption, possession, transfer, display, transportation, sale, or cultivation of marijuana in place of employment. In other words, let's assume somebody says to you, I need to smoke or ingest marijuana for my Parkinson's disease. And you're saying like, okay, you're just going to have to not be able to do that at the work site. They may not have a medical marijuana card, right? They may just have the idea that they're going to ingest marijuana. You do not have to allow people to ingest marijuana on the work premises at all, ever, in the place of employment. That would be in your car, in your client's offices or places of business. Anything that we just talked about for medical marijuana is the same thing. You do not have to allow people to ingest marijuana in the workplace. Also, it does not prohibit you from regulating the conduct otherwise allowed in this chapter when it occurs on your property. What that means is, the otherwise allowed means people are allowed to use recreational marijuana whenever they want, not in a public park, not out in the open, not if under the age of 18, or can't remember, I think it's 18. So there are a lot of restrictions on where they can smoke or ingest marijuana, but public parks, public places, sidewalks, things like that are not places where they're allowed to do that. But what places where they are allowed to do that in your home, at parties, whatever they want to do. And so your conduct, you may regulate their conduct in the workplace, even though the statute might say, yes, you can imbibe and ingest marijuana. You do not have to allow that on your property. And again, property is broadly construed as in cars, fine premises, etc. Next slide, please. So the only protection for employees for marijuana is the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act, which we just discussed. Therefore, for employees or applicants without a card, you can continue not to hire them. You can discipline them or give them corrective action, and you can terminate them. So let me be clear about that. There are two things in 49 years I've learned to hate. One is lack of documentation, and the one is playing favorites. Playing favorites will get you in trouble more than anything other than lack of documentation. So when you do actually engage in corrective action, or as some people like to call it, discipline, you want to document your files. If you don't remember anything else that I say today or said today, remember to document your files. The number two thing is, and I have a very explicit example of this, do not play favorites. So when I'm in a live seminar area, I'll have, so far we have like 16, 17 people on the call here. If I were to ask you how many people with a show of hands have more than one child, and how many people with more than one child like both their children or all their children exactly the same, I always get a couple people in their audience that don't raise their hand. And so I always ask them, I say, well, you don't like all your kids the same? They say, no, I don't. And of course, it all depends on how they're acting on that particular day. Sometimes I'll be told. How many people, if I were to ask you this to raise your hand, like all your employees exactly the same? And I would say the number of hands going up would be very few, because no employer likes all their employees the same. However, when you like somebody, you want to give them a break. How many times have I gotten a call from an employer say, this guy is such a high performer. This woman does such great work. It's just amazing. I just can't even, I couldn't imagine this company without Sally or Jim. Well, why are you calling me? Well, they tested positive for cocaine, or they tested positive for meth, or they tested positive for marijuana, and they don't have a card. And I don't really want to fire them, but I have a policy that says we have a no tolerance policy. What do I do? I said, well, what if you had Jim that you didn't like and Sally that you did like, and you kept Sally around and you fired Jim because you don't like him for the same reason? Well, what would I have there? I would have a gender discrimination case, would I not? Yes, I would. Therefore, consistency of application of your policy is paramount. Or let's assume you have an older person in their 60s, and you want to really make room for younger employees. So that person finds out you test positive for marijuana. Find out that a young person in their 20s and 30s tests positive, but you fire the old guy or the old woman and not the young man or young woman. That's a problem. See, so as much as it pains me to tell people you have to do what you have to do, I give them the advice and then they take it or they don't. So in a case I had for that, the company called me and said, my daughter's best friend is working in XYZ department. She just tested positive for marijuana. I don't want to fire her. I said, I wrote your policy. I know what your policy says. You're supposed to fire her. He says, well, she's my daughter's best friend. Okay, well, what does that do? Now, everybody and their mother in the company knows the daughter's best friend just got away with, failing a drug test and is keeping her job. So sure enough, about 3 weeks later, she gets caught in the parking garage of the company smoking grass. And they take her down, they test her, and she's positive again. And this time the owner says, Well, I don't want to fire her. I said, how many second chances are you going to give this person? So finally they fired her. But these are the kinds of situations that come up in the real world that you all have to deal with. I give you the legal advice, then you get to take it or leave it. The way I look at it, I don't tell people that they have to take my advice, but I can tell you what the consequences are generally if you don't. Because down the road, and here's another thing that I put in my book, which I'm not pushing, but Alex is pushing, but I'm not pushing. In the book, it says, and I believe this firmly, people don't get fired soon enough.
Mm.
You have a person that is a poor performer and you don't take care of it, and you don't fire them, and you don't correct their behavior, the next thing you know is you're going to get a charge of discrimination when you do fire that person because they've been treated differently. They don't take responsibility for their actions. So I would recommend that when you see somebody being a poor performer, violating your drug policy, that you terminate that person. As tough as that might sound, but from a legal standpoint, it's your best course of action. Alex, next slide. I'm just checking to make sure I don't run out of time.
You're good on time. Yeah, it's 12:38, and you just got like 2 more slides, and we have a few questions to get to at the end. So
Great, excellent. That's super. So yeah, you really need a drug and alcohol policy in your handbook. I mean, that's just paramount. And like I said, you need to modify it to include the word marijuana so that it's not illegal anymore after April 5th, like I said. Drug testing policy is not one of those policies where you take your supervisor and the employee and take them into the bathroom and have a litmus paper test when they pee in a cup or something like that. That's not valid drug test under Arizona law. Arizona drug testing law is extremely, extremely detailed. My recommendation for you is to take the person down to Park Point Labs, Centra, or any other drug lab core, any other drug place that you can get a legal drug test because they know how to do it. They know about chain of custody and control. They know about the medical director getting an opinion that the person's impaired. They also know that your employee, if they test positive, can be getting a second test at their own expense to refute the test. So there's a lot of things going on in the Arizona drug law that policy law that you really need to follow. And if you do, and I had that question come up last week of all times, and I just use a test I got over the internet with a litmus paper and have them, and then if they test, if the litmus paper turns the right color, green or blue or whatever it is, or positive, then I take them down. I'm like, nope, that's not going to cut it. So don't use homegrown drug tests. That's a bad idea. And if I said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Consistency, treat everybody the same, no exceptions. That's my legal position. Your practical position may be a little different, which wouldn't make me crazy, of course. You know that. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the thing. You know, I personally don't give a crap if anybody smokes marijuana or ingests marijuana. I don't care. I don't care. And you may not care either if they do it at home. You may do it at home yourself. I don't care. From a legal standpoint, it doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is what's important to you. And what's important to you is what happens in the workplace. I mean, it's no different than somebody has a beer or two or three or four watching a football game on television on Sunday afternoon or a college game on Saturday. Do you really care about that? I mean, is that something that really going to bother you if you find that out? Same thing with recreational marijuana. Is it going to bother you? Is it enough to make you turn against the employee? It's up to you, right? It doesn't matter except what happens in the workplace. So therefore, you must be concerned with the impairment issues and safety issues in your workplace. Not so much the fact that somebody does recreational marijuana or also drinks alcohol sometime on the side, you know, or has a glass of wine after work or a beer after work or something like that. It's not totally relevant to what's going on in your workplace unless they're on call or something like that. And then the next thing is, are you following the very specific guidelines on employee drug testing? Because that's important. Because if you don't follow those guidelines, it doesn't really matter if the person tests positive or not. The drug test is not going to be valid, will not be a valid reason for termination, and therefore subjecting you to a wrongful termination lawsuit. So having heard what I heard, I'm probably done with my slides. And there's my email address, my phone number, which, by the way, if you call me that number, you'll be getting my voicemail because I'm working from home. But I do answer my voicemail because I have remote access to my computer, and my computer gives me my voice messages. So if you have questions that are related to this topic or thereabouts, you can email me at the address on the slide, and Alex will distribute the slides out, all the people that attended the program. So with that, I don't like to keep people over a lunch hour more than over their lunch hour. So I'm more than happy to answer questions, Alex.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, we have a few questions to get us started. So the first one is, are other businesses allowed to sell recreational marijuana or just dispensaries?
No, the
Example.
answer is no.
Okay, because the example is, if I wanted to start a lounge that sells marijuana and alcohol, can I do that?
You got to get a license from the states putting different licenses out there for different reasons. But the people that are in line for a license to sell rec marijuana are the dispensaries that are already selling medical marijuana.
Okay.
So you cannot start your own little grow room and start selling it to your friends and neighbors.
So the medical marijuana places will begin selling recreationally.
Pretty much on April 5th. Yep. They're all gearing up.
Gotcha. Another question. How far back is one allowed to expunge their charges? Is there a specific date?
Not that I could tell in the statute. It just kind of says you can expunge your record. So I'm guessing that if you were 16 at some point or 17 and you're now 40, I don't know why you couldn't expunge it, because the law says just expunge. So I don't know that there's any time limit on that at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's a specific question. If somebody wants me to research, I can certainly do that.
Okay.
Just email me directly with that question, and I'll get the statute. I'll look at the statute real quickly and see if there's a time limit.
Perfect. Thank you. The last question that we have here right now, there's still time to get questions in, everyone, if you have them. But the last one that we have at the moment is, why is the bias towards keeping employees from using marijuana? As someone who runs my own company, I'd prefer to hire marijuana smokers. I found them to be the best employees. Do you have an idea about the bias or any comment on that?
Well, okay, so I grew up in the 60s. I'll be 73 years old next month. I grew up in the 60s, and they always say if you grew up in the 60s and you remember the 60s, you didn't really live the 60s, because that's when marijuana was starting to really pick up, right? So the point is that a lot of people just don't like drugs. Just a bias, an inherent bias about people using drugs. And if you would like to hire marijuana users and you find them to be extremely reliable, well, God bless you. That's great. I think that's fabulous. I mean, that kind of goes to my second to last slide, right? Or my last slide. I can't remember which one it was. It's what's important to you, not to me. Like I said, I don't care. But if you find that marijuana users are extremely reliable employees, that's terrific, and it works for you. So I don't think there's a bias about that for me, but there's definitely a bias about what used to be called illegal drug use before that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks. I know that I think Jane had her hand raised. I just am wondering, Jane, if you had a question that you wanted us to follow up on while we're all together here. Let's see if she's still around. Maybe it was on accident. Nope, an accident. Yeah. Okay. Great. And then, Thom, I just wanted to let you know that we're getting some comments about how informative of a presentation this was, and just showing appreciation.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate it. It looks like Jeannie just raised her hand. Because on my screen, it shows Jeannie raised her hand.
Alrighty.
Jeannie, if you have a question, let me know. We got all kinds of time.
Yep, we do. We still have some time. So, okay, here it is. Oh, another accident.
Huh.
So, no,
You guys got to take your fingers off the mices.
No worries.
Well,
All good.
let me just tell you a couple things that maybe just to wrap up. So I represent a lot of different companies that do a lot of different things. Big companies that have 4,000 employees and small companies that have 5 or less. And I have to say that every one of them, to the point of the person that asked about the bias against drug users, every one of them has a different view of drugs. And so, but when you're talking about marijuana, which is now recreationally acceptable, obviously 60% of Arizonans and many other states are in the same boat, don't have a whoop in the tank about people smoking grass or ingesting marijuana. So, like I said, I think it's really important. I think that's a terrific question that we got because not everybody has an anti-drug bias. And so I think that's important. Although I do know people that won't deal with people that have, a drug, drug and a pro-drug bias. So as long as you're successful and you're happy with the people that are working for you. And again, I don't care from a legal standpoint whether or not you enforce a drug policy. All I care about is whether you do it consistently. That's the most important thing to me ever, is its consistent application, because that's what gets you into trouble. If you have 15 or more employees covered under every discrimination law, if you have one employee in Arizona, believe it or not, in Arizona, and I've practiced law in California, Nebraska, Arizona, and lots of other different states. It's the only state I know where in Arizona, one employee is all you need to be charged with sexual harassment. It's crazy. I mean, normally it's 15 employees, or in city of Tucson, 5. But in Arizona, if you have one employee, so, I mean, it's the kind of thing where you're covered under most of these laws. And I just need you to be consistent in your application and document whatever you're doing, document that. So having reiterated that now to the point where you're all crazy telling Thom to stop talking about that, I'm gonna stop talking about that.
I wrote it down.
Okay, good.
I wrote the consistency thing down in my notebook. So I think it's helpful. We do have another question, Thom. What are the rules and regulations associated with starting a marijuana dispensary? Do you know?
I don't know that. I know it's very complicated when the medical marijuana folks were getting there started. I know you had to have $100,000 cash somewhere readily available. I knew it was a high threshold.
Wow.
Start one. And I know some people that I could refer that person to find that out. In our firm, we actually represent some dispensary folks. So if that person wants to email me directly without, outing themselves today, just email me directly and I'll put you in touch with one of my partners.
Perfect. Awesome.
And that reminds me, we are a full service law firm. Other than divorce and criminal, we do everything else. That's the end of my spiel. That's my 10-second elevator speech.
Well, no, that's great. Well, I'm gonna share that last slide one more time so that as people, as folks start to drift off, that or to not drift off, but as to leave the Zoom, there is Thom's information there. So feel free to jot that down, and then I'll send that out as well with a follow-up email with this recording, the PowerPoint, and Thom's contact info.
Well, thank you so much, Alec, for including me into your Suprema lunch programs. Glad to come back and do it again sometime on some other topic.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. I'm thrilled that we got to have you here today. I certainly learned a lot about a topic I really didn't know much on. So, and I know everyone else did too. People are saying thank you in the chat. So I just
See that, and you're all welcome, and thank you for having me.
Amazing. Alrighty, well, I did finally get us live on Facebook, and I'm gonna stop that now.
I want to make sure I get my Facebook Emmy.
Yeah, well, it's just, I have to admit, it's just a partial Emmy because